Zach Beecham over at Vox.com today. He has been reporting on the American gun violence epidemic for a long time. And today, after the news of the massacre began to come clear, he unleashed and sort of updated a series of his stories that seem tremendously pertinent today. Again, facts, just facts. Putting your partisan politics aside, just facts. Sunday's shooting in Las Vegas, he writes, like so many mass murders before it, seem likely to raise a debate we've had many times before. Why does the U.S. have such a high rate of gun murders? Which is by far the highest in the developed world. It is not even close. I think the closest number of homicides per firearm per 1 million people would be in Switzerland, where they have 7.7 homicides per 1 million people. We have 29.7, almost 30. No developed country is even close to that number. That's 30 per 1 million people. So that's an apples to apples comparison. So why is this? Zach Beecham asks, is it because Americans are just more prone to this type of violent crime? Is it income equality? Is it cultural difference? He points to a 1997 landmark study which actually tried to answer that question. Why are there so many murders in the U.S.? And scholars say that this study from 1997 still holds up, and that finds that America does not have a significantly higher rate of crime compared to similar countries, but that the crime itself is much more likely to be lethal. American criminals just kill more people than their counterparts do in other developed countries. And it appears that the difference for that, the explanation for that is, yes, guns. There was a 1999 book about this study by Berkeley's Franklin Zimring and Gordon Hawkins. It's called Crime is Not the Problem. They set out to examine what was, at the time, the conventional wisdom that America had a uniquely terrible crime problem without any parallel in any other developed democracies. But they found pretty definitively, he says, that the conventional wisdom is actually wrong, that rates of common property crimes in the U.S., for example, are comparable to those reported in many other Western industrial nations. But the rates of lethal violence in the U.S. are much higher. In other words, violence, particularly lethal violence, is a separate issue from the crime rate itself. Other countries have similar numbers of, property crime rates, but only in the U.S. do people die at the rate that they do, thanks to guns, as they go on to find out. In this case, they looked at 20 developed countries and their overall crime rates and their rates of violent death. They found virtually no connection between the crime rate and the rate of violent death. Indicating that the violent death was not a matter of overall crime levels, as used to be the case. Oh, well, we're just more violent here in the U.S. We just have a higher crime rate here in the U.S.
And the truth is that we don't. We have comparable rates.
Comparable crime rates.
Of different kinds of crime, even. And yet the difference is the availability of guns.
Appears to be the case. None of this is conclusive. It's not as easy as doing a study of a drug, for example, where one group will take the drug and the other group will not. You can compare the results. Here you've got a lot of different crime rates, a lot of different reasons, a lot of different laws. So it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison when it comes to these things. But if you look at the crime rate on that, you can get pretty empirical as far as how many people die and how many reported crimes are there. The lowest death rate country is England. It has a crime rate just over the average crime rate, comparing these 20 developed countries. The next lowest violence rate is Japan, which has the lowest crime rate. The third lowest death rate is the Netherlands, but they are in the highest crime rate group. So crime rate does not equate to violent death rate. If there's a high crime rate in a country that doesn't have a lot of weapons, that has strict gun safety laws, then the number of deaths will be much lower, according to this data set. Zimmering and Hawkins write that this data set provides a multinational example of the central point that lethal violence is the crucial problem in the U.S. Shows that the U.S. clustered with other industrial nations in crime rate, but it is very, close to these other countries. But when it comes to violent death, we are head and shoulders above the rest. We're number one. So why does this happen, Beecham asked? Well, it's not why you might think. American violent criminals are just more likely to kill people. That's not why. Only a minority, for example, of L.A. homicides grow out of criminal encounters like robbery and rape. They find that even if it could be shown that American robbery and rape rates are across the board higher than those in similar countries, which does not appear to be true, that it still would not explain why America has so many more homicides than those other countries. The data is revealing a far greater proportion of L.A. homicides grow out of arguments and other social encounters between acquaintances than from robbery or rape. And the mere presence of firearms during those arguments or other social encounters, according to this study, makes what would otherwise be a tense situation turn deadly. When gang members argue with other gang members or a robber sticks up a liquor store, there's always a risk that the situation can escalate to some kind of violence, he says. But when people have a handheld tool that is specifically engineered for killing efficiently, escalation to murder becomes much, much more likely. And I feel sort of stupid pointing this stuff out that seems, at least to my brain, extraordinarily obvious. But apparently we need to point it out because there is so much nonsense and propaganda that is not based on the hard, confirmable data like some of these numbers floating out there. And plus the fact that we just don't have this conversation. So I guess it's incumbent upon me to point out what seems to be the obvious at some point.